The sun was beginning its slow descent in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the quiet suburban streets. Andrea Thompson sat behind the wheel of her small sedan, her white nurse's uniform neatly pressed and spotless. It had been another busy day for her, visiting patients who couldn't easily make it to hospitals or clinics. As a mobile healthcare provider, she spent most of her time driving from one appointment to another, ensuring that even those with limited mobility received proper care. Andrea loved her job. She took pride in knowing that her work made a difference, especially in underserved communities where access to medical attention wasn't always guaranteed. Today, however, felt slightly different. The air seemed charged with an unusual energy, though she couldn't quite put her finger on why. Her phone buzzed on the passenger seat, breaking the silence inside the car. Picking it up, she saw a notification from a patient. A man named Mr. Jenkins who suffered from chronic heart conditions. He needed her urgently. His breathing had worsened, and he feared it might be something serious. Without wasting a moment, Andrea turned onto the main road, heading toward Mr. Jenkins' address. She glanced at the clock on her dashboard. Time was critical and every second counted. Little did she know, this routine drive would soon spiral into chaos. As she navigated through the neighborhood, everything appeared normal. Children played on sidewalks, their laughter echoing softly in the distance. A few cars passed by, and life carried on as usual. But then, out of nowhere, red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. Andrea's heart skipped a beat. She pulled over instinctively, her mind racing with questions. Had she done something wrong? Was there an issue with her vehicle? She rolled down her window, trying to remain calm despite the knot forming in her stomach. One of the officers approached her car, his posture stiff and authoritative. "License and registration," he barked, not bothering to explain why she'd been stopped. Andrea complied without hesitation, handing over the requested documents while explaining herself politely. "I'm actually on my way to see a patient," she said, gesturing to her uniform. "He's having trouble breathing, so I need to get there quickly." But the officer didn't seem interested in her explanation. His eyes scanned her face, then lingered suspiciously on her hands as she held the papers. For a brief moment, Andrea thought maybe he hadn't heard her clearly. Perhaps if she repeated herself, he'd understand the urgency of her situation. "Officer, I'm a nurse practitioner," she added gently. "This is my uniform. I have an emergency call right now." Instead of acknowledging her words, the officer asked abruptly, "Do you know how fast you were going?" Andrea frowned, taken aback by the question. She hadn't been speeding, at least not enough to warrant such a dramatic response. Still, she decided against arguing. "I don't think I was going too fast," she replied cautiously. "If I was, I apologize. But I really do need to get to my patient." The officer exchanged glances with his partner, who stood nearby, arms crossed. Something about their demeanor shifted. They seemed less concerned with traffic violations and more focused on Andrea herself. One of them muttered something under his breath before speaking louder. "You match the description of someone we're looking for," he stated flatly. "Someone reported a robbery earlier today." Andrea blinked, stunned. Robbery? That didn't make any sense. She looked down at her pristine uniform, then back at the officers. "Does this look like the outfit of someone committing a robbery?" she asked incredulously, attempting to keep her tone light. But her attempt at humor fell flat. Instead of easing the tension, it only seemed to irritate the officers further. "Step out of the vehicle," one of them ordered sharply. Andrea hesitated, her pulse quickening. This was escalating far too quickly. "Can you please tell me what's going on?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm just trying to do my job." Her plea went unanswered. The officers grew increasingly impatient, repeating their command with growing hostility. Realizing resistance would only make matters worse, Andrea reluctantly opened the car door and stepped out. Her movements were deliberate, careful. She wanted to show them she posed no threat. Yet within moments she found herself surrounded, her freedom stripped away without warning. Before she could fully process what was happening, cold metal clicked around her wrists. Handcuffs. Andrea stared at them in disbelief, her mind struggling to reconcile the absurdity of the situation. Here she was, a respected professional dressed in scrubs meant to symbolize healing and compassion, being treated like a criminal. Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give in to fear or despair. Not here. Not now. Witnesses began gathering along the sidewalk, drawn by the commotion. Some recorded videos on their phones capturing every agonizing detail. Others shouted protests demanding answers from the officers. "What are you doing? Can't you see she's wearing a uniform?" One woman yelled angrily. Another chimed, "This is ridiculous, let her go." Despite the mounting pressure, the officers remained unmoved. Andrea stood silently, her thoughts swirling like a storm. How had things gone so wrong, so fast? All she'd wanted to do was help someone in need, and yet here she was, facing humiliation and injustice simply because of the color of her skin. Though the weight of the moment threatened to crush her, Andrea resolved to stay strong. Deep down, she knew this wasn't just about her. It was about all the others who had faced similar indignities. If nothing else, she vowed to fight back, not with anger, but with truth and dignity. Andrea stood by her car, trying to stay calm as the officer approached her. She kept reminding herself that this was just a routine traffic stop and that everything would be fine if she explained her situation clearly. But deep down, something felt off. The officer's body language wasn't relaxed, it was tense, almost confrontational. Andrea took a deep breath and reminded herself to stay composed. After all, she had nothing to hide. When the officer asked for her license and registration, Andrea handed them over with a polite smile. "I'm actually on my way to see a patient," she said gently, gesturing toward her nurse's uniform. "They're waiting for me, so I'd appreciate it if we could hurry this along." Her tone was respectful, but the officer didn't seem interested in listening. Instead, he glanced at her papers before saying, "Ma'am, you were speeding. Do you have any idea how fast you were going?" Andrea blinked, caught off guard. Speeding? That couldn't be right. She always followed the rules when driving, especially in residential areas where kids played outside. "I don't think I was speeding," she replied calmly. "If there's an issue, I'd like to understand what happened." The officer frowned, his voice growing sharper. "We clocked you going well above the limit. Don't argue with me, just answer the questions." Andrea felt her stomach tighten. Something about his tone made her uneasy. She decided to try again, hoping to diffuse the tension. "Officer, I promise I wasn't speeding. I'm a healthcare worker, and I'm headed to help someone who needs care. Can we figure this out quickly?" But instead of softening, the officer's expression hardened. He turned to his partner, who had been standing silently nearby, and muttered something under his breath. Andrea couldn't hear exactly what was said, but the look they exchanged sent a chill down her spine. It was clear they weren't planning to let this go easily. Before Andrea could say anything else, the first officer stepped closer, his hand resting on the holster of his gun. "Step out of the vehicle, ma'am," he commanded, his voice cold and authoritative. Andrea froze, her heart pounding. This wasn't how traffic stops were supposed to go. She had done nothing wrong, yet here she was, being treated like a suspect. "Why do I need to get out?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly despite her best efforts to stay calm. "I already told you. I'm not speeding, and I'm on my way to work. Please, can we resolve this without escalating things?" The officer ignored her plea. "Ma'am, step out of the car now. Don't make this harder than it has to be." His words carried a warning, one that Andrea couldn't ignore. Reluctantly, she opened the door and stepped onto the pavement, her hands raised slightly to show she meant no harm. Okay, she said softly, hoping to reassure him. "I'm cooperating. There's no reason for this." As soon as she was out of the car, the second officer moved in, pulling a pair of handcuffs from his belt. Andrea's eyes widened, in disbelief. "Wait, what are you doing?" she exclaimed, panic rising in her chest. "Why are you putting me in handcuffs? I haven't done anything." Neither officer responded. They grabbed her arms roughly, forcing them behind her back, as they snapped the cold metal cuffs into place. Andrea winced as the pressure dug into her wrists, but the physical pain was nothing compared to the shock and humiliation she felt. How could this be happening? She was a professional, dressed in her uniform, on her way to help someone in need, and now she was being treated like a criminal. Tears welled up in Andrea's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give these officers the satisfaction of seeing her breakdown. Instead, she focused on staying strong, repeating to herself that this wasn't her fault. She hadn't done anything wrong, and sooner or later, the truth would come out. By now, a small crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, drawn by the commotion. Neighbors peered out of their windows while passers-by stopped to watch the scene unfold. Some began whispering among themselves, shaking their heads in disbelief. One woman pulled out her phone and started recording, capturing every moment of Andrea's ordeal. "This is ridiculous," she muttered to a friend standing beside her. "Look at her, she's wearing scrubs. Why are they treating her like this?" The footage quickly spread online, drawing attention to the injustice unfolding before their eyes. Comments poured in from people who were outraged by what they saw. "How dare they treat a black woman like this?" one person wrote. "She's literally wearing a uniform and helping others, and they're arresting her for no reason." Back at the scene, Andrea tried once more to reason with the officers. "Please listen to me," she pleaded, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her veins. "I'm a nurse practitioner. I'm on my way to see a patient. You can call my workplace. They'll confirm everything I'm saying. This is a misunderstanding." But the officers remained unmoved. One of them muttered something about Andrea matching the description of a suspect wanted for theft earlier that day. When Andrea heard this, she nearly laughed in disbelief. "A suspect? Seriously? Look at me," she exclaimed, gesturing to her uniform. "Does this look like the outfit of someone committing a crime? Does this look like someone who matches a random description?" Her words fell on deaf ears. The officers continued ignoring her protests, seemingly determined to follow through with whatever plan they had concocted. Andrea realized then that reasoning with them was futile. They weren't interested in hearing her side of the story. They had already decided she was guilty regardless of the facts. As the minutes dragged on, Andrea's mind raced. She knew she had to act quickly if she wanted to protect herself. With her hands cuffed behind her back, she managed to reach into her pocket and pull out her phone. Fumbling with it awkwardly, she dialed her brother Marcus's number. Marcus was a lawyer, and Andrea prayed he would pick up. When Marcus answered, Andrea wasted no time explaining what was happening. "Marcus, they've got me in handcuffs," she whispered urgently, keeping her voice low so the officers wouldn't overhear. "They won't listen to me, and they're not letting me go. Please, I need your help." Marcus's response was immediate. "Stay calm, Andrea. I'm on it." Over the next few minutes, he sprang into action, calling local news outlets and posting updates on social media. By the time the officers finally released Andrea hours later, the entire community, and much of the country, knew her name. What had started as a simple traffic stop had turned into a national conversation about race, policing, and justice. And Andrea, though shaken, knew she had a long road ahead, but also a powerful platform to create change. Andrea's heart was racing as she clutched her phone, trying to steady her trembling hands. The cold metal of the handcuffs dug into her skin, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Fear, anger, and disbelief battled for control, but Andrea forced herself to focus. She knew she had to act fast if she wanted to protect herself and ensure this nightmare didn't spiral further out of control. "Marcus, they've got me in handcuffs," Andrea whispered urgently into the phone, her voice low enough that the officers wouldn't overhear. "They won't listen to me, and they're not letting me go. Please, I need your help." On the other end of the line, Marcus's tone shifted instantly from casual curiosity to sharp urgency. As a civil rights attorney, he was no stranger to stories of injustice, but hearing his sister's voice, calm yet tinged with fear, hit him like a punch to the gut. "Stay calm, Andrea," he said firmly, his mind already racing through possibilities. "I'm on it." Don't say anything else to them until I get there. But Marcus knew time was of the essence. He couldn't afford to wait. With one hand gripping his car keys and the other holding the phone, he began making calls. His first stop was the local news station, where he had contacts from previous cases. Listen, something big is happening right now, Marcus explained, rapidly. My sister, a nurse practitioner, is being detained by police for no reason. Witnesses are saying it's racially motivated. Get someone down here ASAP. While Marcus worked behind the scenes, Andrea remained at the center of the chaos. The officers stood nearby, their expressions unreadable, but their body language tense. One of them muttered something about Andrea matching the description of a suspect involved in a theft earlier that day. When Andrea heard this, she felt a mix of indignation and disbelief bubbling up inside her. A suspect? For what? Andrea demanded, her voice rising despite her efforts to stay composed. Look at me. Does this look like the outfit of someone committing a crime? Does this look like someone who matches a random description? She gestured toward her crisp white scrubs, her professional badge still clipped to her pocket. You're making a mistake and you know it. The officers ignored her protests, exchanging glances that seemed to suggest they were more concerned with saving face than admitting fault. Andrea realized then that reasoning with them wasn't going to work. They weren't interested in listening. They had already decided she was guilty, regardless of the evidence or lack thereof. Meanwhile, Marcus's calls began paying off. Within minutes, a local reporter arrived on the scene, camera in hand, ready to document everything. The sight of the media sent a ripple of unease through the crowd that had gathered. Some neighbors had stepped outside to see what all the commotion was about, while others recorded the incident on their phones. A few brave souls even shouted questions at the officers, demanding to know why a woman in scrubs was being treated like a criminal. What did she do wrong? One man called out, his voice filled with frustration. She's clearly a healthcare worker. Why are you harassing her? Another woman chimed in, her tone sharp and accusatory. This isn't right. If she was white, would you be treating her like this? You need to let her go. The growing tension only seemed to make the officers more defensive. One of them barked an order for everyone to back away, warning that anyone interfering would be arrested too. But the crowd didn't disperse. Instead, they pressed closer, their murmurs turning into chants. Let her go, let her go. The rhythmic call echoed through the neighborhood, drawing even more attention to the unfolding drama. Back on the phone, Marcus continued coordinating efforts. He posted live updates on social media, sharing details of Andrea's detention and encouraging people to spread the word. Hashtags like Justice for Andrea and Black Women Matter began trending almost immediately, drawing national attention to the incident. Screenshots of Andrea's uniform, along with witness videos, flooded platforms like Twitter and Instagram, sparking outrage across the country. As the story gained traction online, the pressure mounted on the officers. They could feel the weight of the eyes watching them, the cameras rolling, the phones recording, the voices chanting for justice. For the first time since pulling Andrea over, they started to look uneasy. One of them glanced nervously at the growing crowd while the other muttered something about needing backup. It was clear they hadn't anticipated this level of scrutiny. Despite the mounting tension, Andrea refused to break. She stood tall, her head held high, determined not to let fear take over. Every insult, every accusation, every moment of humiliation fueled her resolve. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every black person who had ever been mistreated because of the color of their skin. It was about accountability, transparency, and change. Finally, after what felt like hours, a police supervisor arrived on the scene. He took one look at the crowd, the reporters and the officers' increasingly uncomfortable demeanor, and immediately pulled them aside for a hushed conversation. Whatever was said, it was enough to prompt action. Moments later, the officer holding Andrea's cuffs reluctantly unlocked them, freeing her wrists from the painful restraints. Rubbing her sore arms, Andrea took a deep breath, trying to process everything that had just happened. Her brother Marcus appeared moments later, rushing to her side. Are you okay? he asked, his voice filled with concern. Andrea nodded, though tears glistened in her eyes. "I'll be fine," she said softly. "But this can't happen again to me or anyone else." By now the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows over the street. Reporters surrounded Andrea, eager to hear her side of the story. Despite her exhaustion, she agreed to speak, knowing how important it was to share her experience. "I'm a nurse practitioner," she began, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I was on my way to help a patient when I was stopped and handcuffed for no reason. This isn't just about me. It's about the systemic issues that allow things like this to happen. We need change, and we need it now." Her words resonated deeply with those listening, both in person and online. By the end of the night, Andrea's story had become a rallying cry for justice, inspiring countless conversations about race, policing, and equality. What had started as a routine traffic stop had turned into a pivotal moment, not just for Andrea, but for everyone who believed in a fairer, more just society. And though the road ahead would be long and challenging, Andrea knew she had the strength to keep fighting. By the time Andrea finished speaking to the reporters, the story had already exploded far beyond the quiet neighborhood where it began. News outlets picked up the footage of her handcuffing, broadcasting it on television and sharing it across social media platforms. The image of a black woman in scrubs being treated like a criminal struck a chord with millions of viewers. It wasn't just Andrea's story anymore. It was a symbol of the systemic injustices faced by marginalized communities every day. As dawn broke the next morning, hashtags like #Justice for Andrea and Black Women Matter were trending nationwide. People from all walks of life, students, professionals, activists, and ordinary citizens, shared their outrage online. Many posted personal stories of similar encounters with law enforcement, highlighting how often Black individuals are unfairly targeted. Others called for immediate action, demanding accountability not just for the officers involved, but also for broader reforms within the police department. Local leaders quickly responded to the growing public outcry. Community organizers held an emergency meeting at a nearby church, inviting residents to discuss what had happened and brainstorm ways to push for change. The turnout was overwhelming. Hundreds packed into the building, spilling out onto the steps outside. Andrea attended too, sitting quietly in the front row as speaker after speaker voiced their support for her and condemned the officers' actions. One elderly woman stood up, her voice trembling with emotion. "I've lived in this neighborhood my whole life," she said, "and I've seen things like this happen before, but this time we're not staying silent. We're standing together, for Andrea, for our children, and for everyone who deserves to feel safe in their own skin." Her words drew applause, followed by chants of "No justice, no peace." The energy in the room was electric, a mix of anger, determination, and hope. Andrea listened intently, feeling both grateful and humbled by the outpouring of support. She hadn't asked for any of this attention, but she understood its importance. This wasn't just about her. It was about creating a future where no one else would have to endure what she had been through. Meanwhile, the police department found itself under intense scrutiny. Calls poured in from concerned citizens, demanding answers about why Andrea had been detained and how such a mistake could happen. Reporters camped outside headquarters, bombarding officials with questions whenever they appeared. The pressure mounted when body cam footage from the officers' vests surfaced, revealing inconsistencies in their initial claims. In the video, Andrea could be heard calmly explaining her situation, yet the officers dismissed her explanations without investigating further. There was no mention of her matching a suspect description until after she questioned their authority. Critics pointed out that if Andrea hadn't been wearing her uniform, and if witnesses hadn't recorded the incident, the outcome might have been far worse. The release of the footage ignited even more protests. Demonstrators gathered outside the police station, holding signs that read, "End racial profiling," and "Accountability now." Some chanted Andrea's name, while others shared tearful testimonials about their own experiences with discrimination. The crowd grew larger each day, drawing national attention and prompting visits from civil rights leaders and politicians. Amid the chaos, Andrea continued her work as a nurse practitioner, determined not to let fear or bitterness consume her. Each patient visit became an opportunity to remind herself why she chose this path: to heal, to help, and to make a difference. Still, the weight of everything she'd endured lingered. At night, she struggled to sleep, replaying the events of that day over and over in her mind. Would it have ended differently if she hadn't made that crucial phone call to Marcus? What if the crowd hadn't shown up? These questions haunted her, but they also strengthened her resolve to fight for change. Marcus, meanwhile, worked tirelessly to ensure justice was served. He filed formal complaints against the officers, calling for their immediate termination and pressing charges for misconduct. He also reached out to lawmakers, urging them to introduce legislation aimed at preventing racial profiling and increasing transparency within law enforcement. His efforts paid off when city officials announced plans to review policing policies and implement mandatory bias training for all officers. But the battle wasn't won yet. The officers' union pushed back, arguing that the men were simply doing their jobs and following protocol. They claimed the incident was being blown out of proportion and accused Andrea of exaggerating her experience for publicity. These statements only fueled the fire, leading to renewed protests and calls for reform. In response, Andrea addressed the public once again, this time at a press conference organized by Marcus. Standing behind a podium flanked by supporters, she spoke with clarity and conviction. "This isn't about me seeking attention," she said, her voice steady despite the storm raging around her. "It's about exposing the truth and holding people accountable. If I don't speak up now, who will? How many more lives need to be disrupted before we say enough is enough?" Her words resonated deeply, earning praise from advocates and allies across the country. Even celebrities and influencers joined the conversation, amplifying Andrea's message and encouraging their followers to take action. Petitions calling for the officers' dismissal garnered hundreds of thousands of signatures, while fundraising campaigns raised money for Andrea's legal fees and community initiatives. As the days turned into weeks, the momentum showed no signs of slowing down. Schools incorporated discussions about racial profiling into their curriculums. Churches hosted prayer vigils for healing and unity, and businesses pledged to support diversity and inclusion efforts. Andrea's story had sparked a movement, one that refused to fade away quietly. Through it all, Andrea remained steadfast, using her platform to advocate for meaningful change. She knew the road ahead would be long and challenging, but she also knew she wasn't alone. With Marcus by her side, a community rallying behind her, and a nation watching closely, she felt ready to face whatever came next. This wasn't just her fight anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in justice, equality, and the power of standing together. The pressure on the police department reached a boiling point as the public outcry continued to grow louder. City officials, sensing the urgency of the situation, knew they couldn't afford to ignore the mounting demands for accountability. After days of heated debates behind closed doors, they finally announced that an internal investigation would be launched into the officers' conduct during Andrea's detention. The officers involved were placed on administrative leave pending the outcome of the review. For Andrea, this announcement was a small but significant step toward justice. She had spent countless sleepless nights replaying the incident in her mind, wondering if anything would ever come of it. But now, with the investigation underway, she allowed herself a moment of cautious optimism. Still, she knew better than to celebrate prematurely. Investigations like this often dragged on for months, and there was no guarantee the findings would lead to real consequences for those responsible. Marcus, ever the strategist, kept pushing forward. He worked tirelessly to ensure the investigation wasn't swept under the rug or watered down by bureaucratic delays. He collaborated with civil rights organizations, legal experts, and community leaders to draft a list of demands aimed at holding the officers accountable. These included not only their termination but also criminal charges for misconduct and wrongful arrest. Marcus made it clear, anything less than full accountability would be unacceptable. As the weeks passed, details from the internal investigation began to trickle out. Witnesses were interviewed, Body cam footage was analyzed frame by frame, and testimonies were cross-referenced. What emerged painted a damning picture of the officers' actions, or rather, their lack of proper procedure. Investigators found that the claim about Andrea matching a suspect description was flimsy at best, based on vague and inconsistent details that didn't align with her appearance. Furthermore, the officers had failed to verify Andrea's identity properly before escalating the situation. The most shocking revelation came when one of the officers admitted during questioning that he had assumed Andrea was lying about being a nurse because she seemed too calm. This admission sent shockwaves through the community, highlighting how deeply ingrained biases can influence law enforcement decisions. For many, it confirmed what they already suspected. Andrea hadn't been treated as an individual, but as a stereotype, a black woman who needed to be put in her place. When the final report was released, it left little room for interpretation. Both officers were found guilty of gross misconduct, violating departmental policies on racial profiling, use of force, and proper protocol during traffic stops. In a rare move, the police chief publicly condemned their behavior, calling it unacceptable and damaging to the trust between law enforcement and the communities we serve. Within days, the officers were terminated from their positions. While some celebrated this decision as a victory, others argued it wasn't enough. Protesters gathered outside City Hall chanting slogans like, "Firing isn't justice," and demanding criminal charges. They pointed out that without legal consequences, similar incidents could, and likely would, happen again. In response, local prosecutors announced they would pursue charges against the officers for false imprisonment and abuse of power. This decision marked a turning point in the case, signaling that accountability could extend beyond internal reviews and into the realm of criminal law. For Andrea, it was both validating and bittersweet. On one hand, she felt relief knowing that the officers might face real consequences for their actions. On the other hand, she couldn't shake the feeling that the entire ordeal should never have happened in the first place. While the legal proceedings moved forward, the fallout from the incident sparked broader discussions about systemic reform. Within the police department, community leaders organized town hall meetings to address concerns about racial profiling, excessive force, and lack of transparency. Residents shared their experiences, some breaking down in tears as they recounted instances of mistreatment by law enforcement. Others offered solutions, such as implementing stricter hiring standards, requiring regular bias training, and establishing independent oversight committees to monitor police activity. Andrea attended several of these meetings, listening intently as people spoke about their fears and frustrations. Though she appreciated the opportunity to contribute to the conversation, she also recognized the emotional toll it took on everyone involved. Each story of injustice reminded her of her own experience, reinforcing her determination to see meaningful change implemented. Eventually, city officials agreed to adopt several key reforms proposed by activists and community members. Among these were measures to increase accountability, such as mandating the use of body cameras during all interactions with civilians and creating a public database to track complaints against officers. Additionally, a new task force was formed to review cases of alleged misconduct and recommend disciplinary actions. These changes were far from perfect, but they represented progress, a step in the right direction. As the dust began to settle, Andrea reflected on everything that had transpired. She thought about the moments when she had felt powerless, humiliated, and afraid. She thought about the strangers who had stood up for her, the reporters who had amplified her voice, and the supporters who had marched in solidarity. Most of all, she thought about the responsibility she now carried, not just as a survivor of injustice, but as someone who could help prevent others from enduring the same pain. Though the road ahead remained uncertain, Andrea felt a renewed sense of purpose. She realized that while the fight for justice was ongoing, every small victory mattered. Whether it was firing 2 officers, passing new legislation, or simply raising awareness, each step brought society closer to a future where equality wasn't just an ideal, but a reality. And Andrea was determined to keep walking that path, no matter how long it took. In the months following the incident, Andrea found herself at a crossroads. The ordeal had left an indelible mark on her life, not just emotionally, but also in terms of how she viewed her role in society. She knew that what happened to her wasn't just a personal injustice. It was part of a larger pattern affecting countless others. Rather than letting the trauma define her, Andrea decided to channel her experience into something meaningful. She wanted to turn pain into purpose. Her first step was joining forces with advocacy groups focused on combating systemic racism and promoting fair treatment within law enforcement. These organizations welcomed her with open arms, recognizing her unique position as both a victim of injustice and a respected professional. Together, they worked on campaigns aimed at educating the public about racial profiling, organizing workshops for young people, and lobbying lawmakers to enact stronger protections against discrimination. Andrea quickly became one of their most vocal spokespeople, using her story to highlight the urgent need for change. One of her proudest achievements came when she partnered with a national coalition to draft legislation designed to increase police accountability. Dubbed the Justice Through Transparency Act, the bill called for mandatory body cameras, independent oversight committees, and stricter penalties for officers found guilty of misconduct. The proposal gained widespread support, with thousands of people signing petitions and contacting their representatives to urge its passage. When the bill was finally signed into law, Andrea stood beside government officials at the ceremony, tears streaming down her face as she thought about all the lives it might impact. But legislative victories were only part of Andrea's mission. On a more personal level, she dedicated herself to mentoring young Black women who aspired to careers in healthcare and other fields dominated by barriers. Many of these women looked up to Andrea as a role model, someone who had faced adversity head-on and emerged stronger because of it. She often spoke at schools and community centers, sharing her journey and encouraging students to pursue their dreams despite the challenges they might encounter. "You are powerful," she would tell them during her talks. "Your voice matters. Your presence matters and your contributions matter. Don't let anyone make you feel otherwise. If you ever find yourself in a situation where you're treated unfairly, remember this. Speak up, stand tall, and never lose sight of your worth." Andrea's advocacy work extended beyond speeches and mentorship. She collaborated with artists, filmmakers, and writers to create content that shed light on issues of race and inequality. One project that particularly resonated with audiences was a short documentary titled Unseen Heroes, which followed Andrea and several other Black professionals as they navigated systemic biases in their respective industries. The film premiered at a prestigious festival and went on to win awards, further amplifying Andrea's message on a global scale. Despite her growing prominence, Andrea remained grounded. She continued working as a nurse practitioner, visiting patients in underserved communities and providing care with the same compassion and dedication she had always shown. Her uniform, once a symbol of vulnerability during the traffic stop, now represented resilience and hope. Patients often thanked her not just for her medical expertise, but for the inspiration she provided simply by being herself. The emotional scars from the incident never fully faded, but Andrea learned to live with them. Therapy played a crucial role in helping her process the trauma, allowing her to confront the lingering fears and anxieties without letting them control her. She also leaned heavily on her family and friends, especially Marcus, whose unwavering support had been instrumental throughout the entire ordeal. Their bond grew even stronger as they reflected on how far they'd come since that fateful day. As time went on, Andrea began receiving invitations to speak at conferences and events across the country. One of her most memorable appearances was at a national summit on civil rights, where she delivered a keynote address to a packed auditorium. Standing on stage under bright lights, she recounted her story with poise and passion, urging listeners to remain vigilant in the fight for equality. "This isn't just my story, it's our story," she said, her voice echoing through the room. "It's the story of every person who has ever been told they don't belong, that they aren't enough, or that their voice doesn't matter. But I'm here to tell you that your voice does matter, and together we can create a world where no one has to endure what I went through." Her words earned a standing ovation, leaving many attendees visibly moved. For Andrea, moments like these reaffirmed her belief in the power of storytelling to spark change. By sharing her truth, she had inspired countless others to do the same, to break their silence and demand justice. Looking back on everything she had accomplished, Andrea felt a deep sense of gratitude. She knew the road ahead would still be challenging, filled with setbacks and obstacles. But she also knew she wasn't alone. Across the nation, people were rising up, demanding accountability, and working tirelessly to build a fairer, more equitable society. Andrea took pride in knowing she was part of that movement, a beacon of hope for those who needed it most. On quiet evenings, Andrea sometimes sat by her window, reflecting on how much her life had changed. From a routine traffic stop to a national conversation about justice, her journey had been anything but ordinary. Yet through it all, she had discovered a strength she didn't know she possessed. A strength rooted in courage, resilience, and an unshakable commitment to making the world a better place. And as she gazed out at the horizon, Andrea smiled softly, knowing that while the fight was far from over, the seeds of change had already been planted. Someday, she hoped, future generations would look back on this chapter in history and see it as a turning point, a moment when humanity chose to rise above division and embrace unity. Until then, Andrea vowed to keep fighting, keep speaking, and keep believing, because in her heart she knew that justice wasn't just a destination, it was a journey worth taking.